He didn't just walk away. He left me fighting for breath on a hospital bed, clinging to life while he ran off to celebrate with his mistress. The man I trusted with my vows, the man who promised to stand by me in sickness and in health, chose champagne and betrayal over my gasping lungs. But what he didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, the very thing he thought would set him free would become his downfall. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss what happens next. Tell me, if you were in my place, left to die by the one person who swore to protect you, what would you have done? Forgive or fight back? Because the secret I carried, worth $100 million, would not just save me, it would destroy him. My name is Grace, and for 10 long years, I believed I had found the man who would walk beside me through every storm. Michael was charming, ambitious, and knew exactly how to make people feel like they mattered. He had this way of commanding a room without raising his voice, of making every person feel like they were the only one who existed. When he looked at you, really looked at you, it was like being caught in a spotlight that warmed you from the inside out. Everyone around me thought we were the perfect couple, the dream husband and wife, building a life others envied. We had the house with the white picket fence, the matching his and hers luxury cars, the annual vacations to places that made our friends scroll through our photos with barely concealed jealousy. Michael's real estate empire was booming, and I played the supportive wife role flawlessly, hosting dinner parties where deals were made over my homemade lasagna and vintage wine. But what no one saw was the cracks forming underneath the polished surface. Michael had a hunger for more money, more power, and eventually, more women. It started small, innocent enough that I dismissed my concerns as paranoia. A secretary who stayed late too often, a business partner's wife who laughed too loudly at his jokes, a personal trainer who seemed to know details about our marriage that I'd never shared, and that hunger would lead him straight into the arms of Jenna, my so-called best friend. Jenna, the woman who held my hair back when I was sick, who knew my coffee order by heart, who I trusted with every secret except the one that mattered most. The irony wasn't lost on me that the two people I loved most in this world had conspired to betray me in the cruelest way possible. Looking back, I wonder if the signs were always there, hidden in the small betrayals. The late-night phone calls he took in another room, the unexplained absences that stretched from hours into entire evenings, the way his eyes lingered a little too long when Jenna was in the room, following the curve of her figure when he thought I wasn't watching. There were the mysterious credit card charges to restaurants I'd never been to, hotel rooms booked during his supposed business trips to cities where I knew he had no clients. But love makes you blind. Love makes you rationalize the irrational, explain away the unexplainable. Have you ever ignored your gut because your heart begged you to believe otherwise? Have you ever convinced yourself that the person you loved couldn't possibly be the person your instincts warned you about? The betrayal came crashing into my life on a day when I was at my weakest. It was a Tuesday. I remember because Michael always said Tuesdays were his lucky days for closing deals. I had been admitted to the hospital for breathing complications that had been building for weeks. What started as occasional shortness of breath had escalated into chest pain so severe I couldn't climb a flight of stairs without stopping. The doctors warned me it was serious, a rare respiratory condition that required immediate intervention. I needed monitoring, medication, and above all, rest. The pulmonologist, Dr. Martinez, pulled Michael aside and explained in hushed tones that my condition could deteriorate rapidly without proper care. I watched my husband's face as he nodded solemnly, his hand squeezing mine with what I thought was genuine concern. And in that moment of fragility, when a husband should have been by his wife's side holding her hand, praying for her recovery, reading her favorite books aloud to pass the endless hospital hours, Michael chose to vanish. I remember waking up in the middle of the night, around 2:47 a.m., The time is burned into my memory because I stared at that digital clock for what felt like hours. The machines around me were whirring their mechanical lullabies, oxygen flowing through tubes that made every breath feel artificial. I turned to find his chair empty, still warm but vacant. A wilted bouquet of flowers sat on the nightstand, chrysanthemums, which I'd always hated, proving he'd never really listened to me at all. The night nurse, a kind woman named Rosa, had seen too many absent husbands in her 20 years of service. When I asked where Michael had gone, she hesitated before telling me he had left hours ago, mumbling something about needing fresh air and promising to return by morning. But Rosa's eyes told me she'd seen this story before, and it never ended with the husband rushing back with renewed devotion. What I didn't know was that fresh air meant Jenna's perfume, that suffocating vanilla scent she wore too heavily, champagne glasses clinking in celebration of their affair, and a private toast to my supposed demise while I lay helpless, fighting for each breath. They weren't just celebrating their love, they were celebrating what they thought was my approaching end, planning the life they'd build on my grave. Imagine that, lying in a hospital bed, barely able to breathe while the man who swore to protect you was laughing in another woman's arms, probably joking about how convenient my illness was for their relationship. Let me ask you, viewers, what kind of man does that? What kind of man looks at his wife suffering and sees opportunity? And more importantly, what kind of woman calls herself a friend while stabbing another in the back, twisting the knife with every stolen kiss? The following morning, Michael returned to the hospital with that smug look on his face, the expression of a man who thought he'd gotten away with murder. He strolled in carrying coffee for himself and a sad hospital cafeteria muffin for me, as if this pathetic gesture could somehow balance the scales of his absence. He thought I was too weak to notice, too broken to suspect, too medicated to think clearly. But pain has a way of sharpening your focus, and betrayal burns away the fog of denial. I saw everything with brutal clarity. The lipstick stain on his collar, not my shade, but Jenna's signature coral pink. The faint whiff of champagne still clinging to his breath, mixing unpleasantly with his morning coffee. The way he avoided direct eye contact, focusing instead on the medical charts and monitors as if they fascinated him. Most telling of all was the guilt gift, an expensive bracelet that appeared on my bedside table as if by magic. Michael had never been one for spontaneous jewelry purchases. This wasn't love. This was conscience money, a bribe paid to his own guilt. He kissed my forehead like nothing had happened, like the previous night had been erased by sleep, as if betrayal could be disguised with a gentle touch and morning small talk about my medications. "How are you feeling, sweetheart?" he asked, his voice carrying that practiced concern he used with difficult clients. But here's the part that will shock you. I didn't confront him. I didn't scream, and I didn't beg for an explanation. I didn't throw that gaudy bracelet at his lying face or demand to know where he'd really spent the night. Because while Michael believed he was celebrating his freedom from a burdensome wife, while he was making plans for a future that didn't include me, I was holding on to a secret that would make all his deceit meaningless. You see, a year before all of this chaos, before the hospital stay that revealed his true character, I had inherited a fortune, $100 million from my great-aunt Millicent, a woman who'd built a textile empire and never married because, in her words, most men are intimidated by a woman with her own money, a sum that Michael knew nothing about, because I had kept it separate, untouched, locked away in accounts he couldn't access and investments he couldn't trace. Aunt Millicent had taught me something crucial before she died. Grace, darling, never let a man know about money he didn't earn. It changes them in ways you won't recognize. Tell me, do you think money reveals a person's true character? Or does it only magnify the flaws that were already there, turning small cracks into gaping chasms? When I was discharged 3 days later, I decided to play my part carefully. I had learned something about myself during those lonely hospital nights. I was an excellent actress when survival depended on it. I acted fragile, defeated, the dutiful wife who had no fight left in her. I let Michael help me up the stairs, leaning heavily on his arm, while secretly noting how eager he was to rush through this charade of care. I made myself small, breakable, dependent. I asked him to open jars, to reach high shelves, to make decisions about trivial things like what to watch on television. Michael ate it up, this vision of himself as the strong protector returning to save his helpless wife. His ego preened under the attention, completely blind to the fact that I was studying him like a specimen under a microscope. Michael and Jenna mistook my silence for weakness, and they grew bolder. They whispered in corners during dinner parties, thinking I was too medicated to notice. They took late-night calls right in front of me, stepping just outside the room as if a thin wall could muffle their intimate conversations. They even dared to plan weekends away, business conferences, that somehow required my best friend's attendance as well. The most audacious moment came when Jenna visited me during my recovery, bringing soup and sympathy while wearing the same perfume I'd smelled on Michael's clothes. She sat by my bedside holding my hand, asking about my health with tears in her eyes, crocodile tears that she'd probably practiced in the mirror. "Grace, honey, I'm so worried about you," she whispered, her voice dripping with false concern. "Promise me you'll take care of yourself. Michael needs you strong." The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. Here was my husband's mistress, sitting in my home, touching my hand, speaking my husband's name with an intimacy that belonged to me alone. But while they played their dangerous game, I was planning mine. I met quietly with lawyers, not the family attorney Michael knew about, but specialists in asset protection and divorce strategy. I arranged documents, shifted my fortune into an irrevocable trust, and created a paper trail that would leave Michael with nothing but the debt he'd accumulated trying to keep up with the lifestyle my secret money had funded. Piece by piece, I built my revenge, not with rage but with precision. Because revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, calculated, and delivered with a smile that never wavers. Viewers, tell me, if you were betrayed like this, would you seek loud justice that everyone could see? Or would you prefer the quiet satisfaction of watching your betrayer destroy himself, never knowing what hit him? Michael's downfall began slowly, almost imperceptibly, like a crack in a dam that starts as a hairline and grows into a flood. Deals he thought were guaranteed slipped through his fingers when background checks revealed financial instabilities he couldn't explain. The real estate empire he'd built was largely funded by loans secured against assets that, unbeknownst to him, were no longer available as collateral. Colleagues started keeping their distance when whispers began circulating about his financial irregularities. Clients who had once fought for his attention suddenly found other agents. The country club where he networked was the first to send a polite letter about overdue membership fees. Then came the notice from his luxury car dealer about missed lease payments. The lavish lifestyle he flaunted, the expensive dinners, the designer suits, the weekend getaways, began to crumble when the funds he secretly relied on, my inheritance that had been quietly supporting our extravagant spending, no longer answered his desperate calls to our joint financial advisor. And Jenna? The mistress who thought she had secured her place at his side, who had probably already started planning their future together, began to see the cracks in her golden ticket. She'd fallen for Michael's wealth and status, not the man himself. It turns out, betrayal loses its thrill when it comes with empty bank accounts and creditors calling at all hours. The first sign of her retreat was subtle. Canceled dinner dates became phone calls became text messages, and text messages became longer silences. I watched from my window as she stopped coming to our house for their secret meetings, watched Michael pace the driveway checking his phone like a teenager waiting for a text back. She started disappearing too, leaving Michael with nothing but his lies and the growing pile of bills he could no longer afford to pay. The final blow came when she blocked his number entirely. I know because I heard him calling her from different phones, his voice getting more desperate with each attempt. Have you ever seen someone so sure of themselves unravel piece by piece? It's almost poetic, like watching a house of cards collapse in slow motion, each falling piece revealing how unstable the foundation always was. The day Michael came back to me, Begging for forgiveness is a day I will never forget. It was 6 months after I'd been discharged, 6 months of watching him spiral, while I recovered not just my health, but my strength, my clarity, my sense of self-worth. He looked thinner, his expensive suits hanging loose on a frame that had withered under stress. His eyes were hollow, rimmed with the kind of exhaustion that comes not from hard work, but from constant anxiety. His confidence, once his most attractive feature, had shattered into something desperate and grasping. He found me in the garden, our garden, the one I'd been tending alone while he played house with another woman. I was pruning roses and the symbolism wasn't lost on either of us. He approached carefully like someone approaching a wounded animal that might bite. "Grace," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I need to talk to you." I continued cutting away the dead blooms, not looking up. "About what, Michael?" "About us. About what I did. About how sorry I am." The words tumbled out like a confession he'd been practicing. He said he made a mistake, that it meant nothing, that he wanted to make things right. He claimed he loved me all along, that Jenna had seduced him during a moment of weakness, that he'd been confused and stupid but never stopped loving me. The lies came so easily, each one more desperate than the last. He painted himself as the victim of a manipulative woman, as if his betrayal was something that happened to him rather than something he chose with calculated cruelty. But as he spoke, all I could hear was the echo of that hospital room, the beeping machines that counted my heartbeats while he counted the minutes until he could escape to another woman's bed, the emptiness of his chair that should have been filled with his presence, the sound of silence when I needed him most, when I was literally fighting for my life. And in that moment, as he knelt in the dirt of our garden, reaching for my hands with fingers that had caressed another woman while I lay dying, I realized the cruelest revenge isn't anger, and it isn't hate, it's indifference. I looked at Michael, the man I once believed would be my forever, and felt absolutely nothing. No love, no hate, no anger, no sadness, just a vast emptiness where my feelings for him used to live. That nothingness was the closure I never knew I needed, the freedom I hadn't known I was seeking. "Michael," I said finally, setting down my gardening shears and really looking at him for the first time in months. "I know about Jenna. I've known for a long time." The color drained from his face. "Grace, I can explain." "I don't want explanations. I want a divorce." Viewers, let me ask you, is indifference truly the greatest revenge? Or do you believe betrayal deserves punishment louder than silence? Because what happened next proved that sometimes the universe has its own sense of justice. The divorce proceedings revealed the true extent of Michael's financial ruin. Without access to my hidden fortune, which had been silently subsidizing our lifestyle through careful money transfers he'd never questioned, his business empire collapsed like a house built on sand. But the most shocking revelation came during the asset division hearing. Michael's lawyer, confident that they'd walk away with half of everything, demanded a complete financial disclosure. That's when I watched Michael's face transform from smug certainty to absolute horror as my attorney revealed the existence of the $100 million trust. "Your Honor," my lawyer announced with theatrical flair, "Mrs. Grace Williams inherited a substantial sum from her great-aunt's estate, which has been held in a separate trust throughout the marriage." Michael's jaw literally dropped. Jenna, who had somehow convinced herself she had a right to attend the hearing, looked like she'd been slapped. The woman who thought she'd stolen a wealthy man's heart realized she'd actually stolen a financial fraud who'd been living off his wife's secret money. The judge awarded me everything. The house, the cars, the business assets that were purchased with funds traced back to my inheritance. Michael walked away with exactly what he'd brought to the marriage, nothing but debt and delusions. When the divorce papers were finally signed, I didn't walk out of that courthouse as a victim. I walked out as a survivor, as a woman who had learned the most valuable lesson of all, that the person who betrays you reveals far more about themselves than they ever do about you. The world may have seen me as the wife who had been abandoned, pitied me as the woman whose husband left her for her best friend, But I knew the truth. I wasn't abandoned. I was freed from a marriage built on lies, freed from a man who saw me as a convenient accessory to the life he wanted, rather than a partner worthy of respect. And my $100 million secret was more than money. It was my shield, my escape, my justice. It was the proof that I had never needed him, that every success he thought was his own was actually built on the foundation of my hidden strength. 6 months later, I heard through mutual friends that Michael had moved back in with his mother, working as a junior associate at a firm that wouldn't even have taken his calls a year earlier. Jenna had moved across the country, apparently discovering that a bankrupt man holds significantly less appeal than a wealthy one. Life has a way of revealing the truth, doesn't it? And Michael's truth was that he never valued me. Not my heart, not my mind, not my loyalty, and certainly not my worth as a human being. But my truth? My truth was that I didn't need him. Not his money, not his status, not his love. Not then, not ever again. So I leave you with this. If betrayal ever finds its way into your life, remember that your power doesn't lie in their choices. It lies in your response. The question isn't whether someone will hurt you. If you love deeply enough, long enough, someone eventually will. The question is whether you'll let their betrayal define your story or whether you'll write your own ending. Would you crumble under the weight of their lies, drowning in the sorrow of what you thought you had? Or would you rise stronger, carrying your own secret weapon of resilience, your own hidden fortune of self-worth that no one can steal, spend, or squander? The greatest revenge isn't proving them wrong about you. It's proving yourself right about who you really are when everything else falls away. If you loved this story of resilience, betrayal, and ultimate triumph, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel for more stories of strength in the face of adversity, comment your thoughts below, I read every single one, and share this video with someone who needs to hear that they're stronger than they know. Your support keeps these stories alive, and I can't wait to bring you the next chapter of survival and strength. Until then, this is Grace, and I'll see you in the next video. Remember, you are never as powerless as they want you to believe.